Justin Krupp here. I'm doing my Weka Challenge video recording. I just want to walk through kind of what I did. So I was interested in looking at education statistics for unions. I used to be a union representative when I was a teacher up in Pennsylvania. And so this has been a question that's nagged me for a long time, whether there's a correlation between unions and student performance in union states versus non-union states, or rather right-to-work states. So I pulled the information from the National Center for Education Statistics, and basically what I gathered was their salary information for 2011, so average teacher salary, and also science, reading, and math performance metrics for that same year. And then I also collected whether or not the state was a right-to-work state from this little chart right here. There are basically 27 right-to-work states and 23 union states. And then I created my own little ARF data right here. Here we have the ARF data set that I created, basically coded and classified. There's a CSV version of it that might be easier to read. Basically, I captured the science scores, the science rank, so what rank they were in the states, what tier they were in, first, second, or third, math, same for math, same for reading, and then salary, the average salary, the rank, the tier, and then whether it was a union state or right-to-work state. Then, because I'm a little obsessive, I decided to write a little quick Python program that would give me an idea of which of the different features would give me good information gain. So I wrote a quick little program with some help from the interwebs, but to calculate info gain. So we'll run this real quick, and it'll think a little bit. And for whether or not the union is a state, the entropy is extremely high at almost close to 1. The information gain on salary tiers is only 0.12. The information gain on reading score tiers is 0.16. And the information gain for math scores and science scores is significantly lower at 0.8 and 0.1. So that gave me a little bit of a target, an idea of which features were going to be the best for me. You can Weka and see what happens. I've already got it up. And here is our data sets, classified by union state nominal. And we identified that math and science were not as clearly correlated based on the information gain metric. And we can see that in the graph. That's not really surprising. Reading score, on the other hand, clearly has a slant towards union states. Union are blue and non-union are red. That wasn't intentional. Politically, it's just the way that Weka coded it. But there's clearly a slant, especially when we look at reading tier. The high tier, this is 1, is the better. That means they're at the top, not at the bottom. So it's inverse of the score. And we would expect that salary has a huge correlation with unions, since unions, one of their primary purposes is to advocate for higher salaries. So, and the data bears that out, unsurprisingly. Opportunity to go in and visualize some of this and really explore some of the data. And if we go into here, it gives us the opportunity to kind of really do some thoughtful experiments about how the data gets sliced. So if we choose, for instance, salary tier, remembering that 1 is the highest tier, the top third, middle third, and bottom third, and we plot that against the average reading tier, so again, top third, middle third, bottom third, and we increase the jitter so that we can see the differences between the data. We'll see that we've only actually, if we drew a line right down through here, we would only misclassify 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, about 9 out of 50 observations, out of 50 states. So that's a really high success rate, surprisingly high success rate, just based on the tier of the salary and the performance of the reading scores. Now, let's admit that clearly average salary tier had a high bias, so we'll talk about eliminating that. Okay, now that we have a sense of the valuable features, we can actually get down to actually doing the classifying and the predicting of the class value union state. So, the first algorithm that I ran, or test that I ran, was actually 0R. Now, 0R basically takes the most frequently appearing classified instance. In other words, in this case, it is the non-union state, the right-to-work state, and it basically predicts that for 100% of the cases. And if we did that, 27 out of 50 cases, that generates a 54% rate of correct classification. That's the score we gotta beat, minimally. Minimally, we have to beat that score. Because if we don't beat that percentage, basically we're doing worse than predicting the most frequent class, which is embarrassing. So the next one that I did after that was rules 1R. Now what run R does is it looks through all the different features, and it finds the one that is most directly correlated with the class feature, in this case, again, union or non-union, right to work. And in this case, it found that average reading rank, okay, so in other words, what rank the state was in terms of the union, it was the 50th ranked state, that's most directly correlated with right to work versus the inverse. And in that case, if we just naively applied that rule and that rule alone, we would predict 41 out of 50 cases, or an 82% correct classified instance rate. Again, we should be able to do better than that, because this is a pretty naive test, but again, this isn't a very rich data set either. So, those are our target goals. We get to play with some trees. Alright, so I used the J48 just because it seemed the most accessible, and most of the tutorials pointed me towards that, so that's the one I used. There are others, which I will learn in the future. However, this is the one I used to begin with. Now, I ran it against everything, and I actually got a 86%. I'm like, whoa, great, that's way better than the 1R version, so let's see what it did. And we see that it split on the most correlated value, average reading score, and then that predicts 10 correct classifications of union. And then if we take a look at the average salary tier, whether it's the top, the middle, or the third, that will split it down further. This is not entirely surprising, considering average salary is, again, correlated directly with union and right to work. So, and that may not be completely interesting to us. So then I decided, hey, well, let's eliminate out the average salary. And if we visualize that version, average reading score, I got rid of the tiers, the average reading salary tiers. Now I'm just looking at the average salary itself. And then we get a little bit more of an interesting tree, a bush-ish. Average reading score still functions the best. Then we get average salary, that splits on 55,000. That correctly classifies right to work. And then the average science score, that means that unions tend to actually, ironically, perform, it looks like, less well than non-right to work. But anyway, so that wasn't that great, but the success rate was good. Then I moved on, and I said, well, okay, come on, what's the real thing we got to beat here? Average reading score, if we just take that alone, it's 74%. We got to beat that. So I took out all of the salary stuff and only put in the scores, the different performance ratings. And then we got this really complicated, and I can't even read it, thing, but basically it correctly classifies 90%. Okay. But then I thought, hey, we're predicting whether or not it's a union. What if we flip that? What if we said, hey, can we predict the correct tier of the reading score versus whether or not it was a union state or not? So now I'm flipping this. I'm actually predicting something else. Before I was trying to predict whether or not it was a union state or not a union state, and we got a 90% success rate. And that's not, again, completely surprising because of all these different splits, and it doesn't necessarily tell me whether or not math versus science, I mean, clearly we found out that science actually did better for the right to work states, not the other way around. So I said, what is the best thing to actually predict the reading score? So if we were to throw everything into the tree classifier at the same time and try to predict, or rather classify, the class of 1, 2, or 3, the top tier reading scores, middle tier reading scores, or third tier reading scores, turns out that with an 84% classification rate, we can predict it based on just average math score alone. And this isn't surprising because we've known for a long time that math scores tend to correlate very closely with predicting higher reading scores. That is, if you do well at math, you tend to do well at reading. It's not necessarily the same way around. Okay, so 84% of the time we can predict the percentage of, the tier of the reading score. But what predicts the math score? So if we throw everything except for reading into the math score with a 76% rate, we can accuracy rate, we can actually predict it based on the union state, and the average salary rank. So given the amount of salary that any given state pays versus whether it's a union state or not, this can pretty quickly determine how well someone will do on the math score. So the highest value for predicting the range or the tier that you will fall in as a state for reading is math, and the highest predictor for that is actually union state and average salary rank. Okay. So, taking that into account, if we eliminate all other factors and then leave, If we leave the math tier in, understanding, of course, that math tier is very easily classified based on your union state or whether or not you have a high salary, we then can say, okay, yes, the math tier does quickly predict whether or not you'll do well in the reading, but then subsequently, union state and average salary further narrow it down and better predict your actual whether you do well in reading or not, with an 84% rating. Alright, so at the end of this end, there's a lot of numbers. Basically, if you are a state that has a union, you tend to pay higher salaries. And if you pay higher salaries and are a union state, you tend to have higher math scores. If you tend to have higher math scores, you also tend to have higher reading scores. But even if you don't have higher math scores, if you're a union or a higher paying state, you tend to do better on the reading tests. In short, if you're a union state, you tend to do better on standardized tests. Your students tend to do better on standardized tests. If you are a non-union state, and for non-union states, you have higher salaries, you tend to do better on standardized tests. So there you go.